Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name's Mel and today we're going to be looking at my reading journey for the whole of 2025. So before we get more into it, today you'll be watching this on Christmas Day. So if you celebrate Christmas, happy Christmas. I hope you have a lovely day and I hope you get all of the books that you put on your wish list. So I started my channel at the beginning of October. So we did like a spooky reading month, and then over the next 2 months, over November and December, we've been reading quite a range of things because I've been doing a reading challenge. So at the start of the year, I picked up a list somewhere on the internet, and I think it had about 70 points on. And the points were things like book must have a 3-word title, the plot is set in autumn, and then, you know, various things like sci-fi, romance, thriller, different kind of love tropes and things like that. And the idea is you read a book so that you can cross that one off the list, and you know the hope is that you will read the 70 books that were given on there. Now I can't give credit to this because I have absolutely no idea where I got it from. I didn't get it from a YouTube video, it was online somewhere just randomly. But the thing is, as I started doing that, I actually really enjoyed it. So I actually amended some of the points to be more relevant to me, and then I started adding points because I read more than the 70 books in the year, so I felt like I was getting through it a little bit easily, so I actually added another 30 points onto this list and made it a 100-point challenge. And as I said, reworded some of the points to be more applicable to me. I did find that the original one was very America centric, so I'm guessing the original poster of it was set somewhere in America, so not all of it sort of really was relevant to me. So with that in mind, that's one of the main things I've been working on this year, and as I say, although I've only been running this channel for 3 months, my reading journey's obviously started before I started Bookish Brummy, so I thought it'd be worth us having a video where we talk about the points. So I'm not going to talk about all of the points in detail, I'm not going to talk about all of the books that I read in detail this year, but just to give a little bit of coverage of it so you can sort of see what I've actually been reading throughout the whole of the year, because you've only had visibility for the last 3 months. So far this year I've read 132 books and I've listened to 20 audiobooks. So I'd say that's pretty good going because I've managed to consume over 150 stories. Now, there was a little bit of crossover between the audiobook and the books that I read. I didn't listen and read at the same time. Some of them I read and then I listened to the audiobook afterwards, and then some of them I listened to and then I read the book afterwards, but there wasn't too many crossovers with that. Of the 132 books I read this year, 28 of them were Stephen King books. So I'm just going to put those books up on the screen now. Okay, so what I will say is when I get into more figures about my favourites and the ones that I disliked, I'm not going to include Stephen King books in those numbers because I've done a separate video with regards to the books that I've read on Stephen King this year, and that will release on Boxing Day, so tomorrow. So if you're keen to look into what Stephen King I've been reading and what are my favourites, then you might want to go and watch that video. So if we take away the 28 from the 132, that means I've got about 104 books left, and of those 104 books I had 18 5-star reads, which I think is pretty good going because that's nearly a fifth of the books that were left. So I'm just going to put up on the screen now the 5-star reads that I had this year. And as you can see, there's quite a range there because there's historical fiction, literary fiction, sci-fi, there's a lot of dystopian stuff, contemporary fiction and thriller. And you can see in there, you know, there's a lot of John Marrs books, so there's like 4 John Marrs books in there. So I did discover John Marrs as an author this year. He's a really good author for people who've never come across him before. He does thriller books, but he does like this dystopian dark universe, and I think the first book in that is called The One, and they actually made that into a Netflix TV series as well, although I've got to be honest, like, I preferred the book to the Netflix series. But yeah, in The One, essentially we're talking about using people's DNA to try and match them as best love matches, essentially. So cutting out the groundwork of going on dates and having to get to know somebody for 5 years. Just take a DNA test and figure out, you know, who the love of your life is. But this book is really, really good because, you know, whilst that's the premise, a lot of things can go wrong with that. So I really do like John Marr. So he's heavily represented in these top 5, but I've got to be honest, I'm always really happy with the books that I read of his, and I always know I'm getting a 5-star read. So yeah. Other books in there which you will have noticed was Interview with Vampire by Anne Rice. I read that book as part of my spooky reads in October. I thought it was an absolutely fantastic book, and I've actually got a separate video for that in my watch list if you're interested to know more about that book. And likewise, there's one in there called The People in the Trees, and I actually read that a few weeks ago, and that was a total surprise because I wasn't even planning on reading that book, and that book's written by Hanya Yanagihara, who wrote A Little Life. The People in the Trees was outstanding, and again, I've done another video on that the other week, so if you want to know more about that book, you could always go and watch that video as well. And then there's some books that I've mentioned in my weekly reviews, like Nightfall by Isaac Asimov, When We Were Orphans by Kazuo Ishiguro, and then The Matchbox Girl as well by Alice Jolly. I have a video where I've talked about 5-star reads from this year that I would actually recommend, and that does sort of small reviews on The Matchbox Girl, Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Susan, Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, and The Women by Kristen Hanna. But yeah, so I've actually found some really, really good books this year, and I think when I started the year off, I probably read some more books that were like lower scored, but as the year went on, I really began to understand what it is that I actually like to read, and that made it much easier to start picking up books that weren't disappointing. Because I think at the beginning of the year I was still sort of trying to find my feet a little bit. I was reading quite a lot of contemporary fiction and thrillers, but I sort of realised actually I prefer a more dystopian thriller. I found Stephen King in about March time, which is more like horror, sort of got into those books, and then I also found John Marrs this year, which again is more like dystopian thriller, so a little bit darker, I think. I discovered that I don't like cosy fiction, as in like cozy crime. I did try a few of those, just not really for me, if I'm honest. So with the 20 audiobooks that I've listened to this year, I'm just going to put those up on the screen now so you can see what those were. And outstanding audiobooks that I've listened to this year was Triflers Need Not Apply by Camilla Bruce. That is historical fiction that's set on a real life character called Bella Sorensen. And she supposedly was a serial killer at the beginning of the 20th century in Chicago, America, and she had originally grown up in, I want to say Sweden, but it could have been Norway, not entirely sure. But essentially, yeah, she moved over to Chicago and began killing people, and none of this was really discovered until after she had died and bodies had been unearthed on her property. So Camilla Bruce decided to write a fictional story based on this character, just to give her a bit of a backstory. So, you know, there's nothing to say that what Camilla Bruce has written about Bella Sorensen is true, because there's no evidence for it, but it really is a fascinating story, and I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was done really well. Other audiobooks that I think are up there was The Stranger Times by C.K. McDonnell. That's narrated by a man called Brendan McDonald, who does an absolutely fantastic cast of voices in this book. It was just so funny. Essentially, The Stranger Times is a newspaper, and they write all the kind of stories about people who've seen UFOs, ghost sightings, and all the rest. And then obviously they have to, as part of the plotline, they're looking into investigating these kind of oddities. But the cast are just really, really funny. The characters they're all really likeable, and I really love them. And I tend to listen to my audiobooks when I go out for a run as well. And with that one, I enjoyed it so much that I actually was looking forward to going out running in things like horrendous torrential rain, just so I could listen to the audiobook. I'd also say La Belle Sauvage by Philip Pullman is up there. That's absolutely fantastic narration as well by Michael Sheen. He's such a good narrator. Again, I think most books that he does I've really liked, but I also felt La Belle Sauvage, the story itself, which is the first book of Dust, was really good. And then I'd say like an honourable mention in there is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V. Schwab. I thought that was a really good story. Really enjoyed that. And also All the Colours of the Dark by Chris Whitaker was absolutely fantastic. I enjoyed that so much I've actually bought a hard copy of that book because I'd like to also read that, and I feel like it's a story that I could reread multiple times over the years. And that story is about a murder that happens, but it's also about coming of age, and it spans several generations, several decades. And it's just a really well written story, but you know, I really enjoyed the audiobook of it as well. So what I think would be good now is if I put on the screen all the points that I was trying to cover in this reading challenge. So there were 100 points in the reading challenge. So I'm just going to put the first page up on the screen, and then when that one disappears, I'm just going to put up the second page on the screen. So I read 132 books. So at the moment there's one square that I'm just currently working on, but I don't see that I wouldn't have finished it by the end of the year, essentially, because I've got like a week to work on that. So essentially we can say that I've actually managed to complete that challenge. And I'm not going to say it was easy. There were a couple of points on there that I did find really hard to do. I was quite worried about the sci-fi square because you know, I didn't know if I was really into sci-fi beyond dystopian work, but actually I really enjoyed it, so it turned out to be a really good one to do. Again, I found romance quite a hard one to do because that's not something that I read a lot of, and I think, you know, there were a couple of squares on there which were relatively easy. So there were things like, oh, must have a 2-word title, must have a 1-word title, must have purple on the cover, or the cover must be your favourite colour. And those ones are relatively easy to do because, you know, I didn't even really have to pick a specific book to do them. I just managed to cover them off naturally with the things that I was reaching for to just mood read, if I'm honest. So what you will see is when I put the reading challenge points up, a couple of them were blue. So the 20 blue ones that you see on there, no, 22 were blue. The 22 blue ones that you see on there are points that I managed to cover with Stephen King books. So because I started reading Stephen King in March, and I aim to read at least one, preferably 2 Stephen King books every month, and sometimes I've been reading 3. I was really trying to get off, tick off all the challenge points with Stephen King. So I was quite happy that I managed to do 22 of the 100 points with Stephen King. So that means over a fifth of the points I managed to do with Stephen King. You'll also notice on there was some orange squares. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 6 orange squares that were on there, and those orange squares were representing reading points that I covered off, and I just really didn't like the book for one reason or another. So I haven't made a separate video about reading things that I haven't liked, but I thought I would just cover a little bit of it in this video. Not because I particularly want to be negative, but I just want to make it clear that I don't actually enjoy everything that I read, and sometimes I make the wrong choice in book, and that's okay. But I think it's also important to look at why you didn't enjoy something, because if you don't really look at why you don't enjoy something, you won't really understand when you're making your next choice, like whether you're making a good choice or a bad choice. So we'll cover these slightly. So I just want to emphasise before I get into the points about the books that, you know, just didn't do it for me. This is a subjective thing. It's totally my opinion how I felt about these books, because I'm just, you know, I read a lot of things. I have a massive range, as you will have seen on this channel so far, of things that I like to read, but that doesn't mean that I like everything within, you know, those genres that I like to read, and I think that's normal. So the one point that really stuck out for me that I just didn't enjoy was there was a reading point which says genre out of your comfort zone. So, you know, I would say that was quite a hard one for me to do, because you know, if it's out of your comfort zone, you kind of know that, so you tend not to read it anyway. So what I decided to try and do, I'd been seeing some books pop up that were looking at like Greek mythology and modern day retellings, and I don't really know that much about them, but they looked interesting to me. So I picked up The Blood of Hercules by Jasmine Mass. Um, I think I managed to get that in Sainsbury's, and you know, the back of the cover sounded pretty good. It was like, you know, this woman finds out that she has the blood of a Greek god, and she ends up going to the school to learn how to use it or whatever. So I was like, fine. What I was not prepared for in this book was the fact it was like dark romantasy. Now, I don't like romantasy anyway, and I dislike dark romantasy even more. You know, and that's how it was described, I think, in somewhere on the book or in the book, was like dark romantasy. And so I sort of, you know, I gave it a go, and I did read through to the end, but I just felt like our main character was subjected to a lot of violence, and I found it really hard to understand how any of it was romantic in any way. It just felt like she was captive, you know, sexually assaulted by these other supreme beings, and I did, you know, and the ending of the book, I didn't see that she rose up, took power for herself or anything like that, you know, and I just found it fairly sickening, to be honest. Sorry, it was like, you know, so I definitely didn't want to read the second one for that. So I think, you know, this genre out of my comfort zone, I have left this reading point off the reading points that I'm going to do next year, because in reality, I know I don't like romantasy. I know I don't like dark fantasy, like dark romantasy fantasy either. You know, I think I'd overlooked that going into this book, thinking, oh well, you know, there's going to be this Greek mythological retelling, and that will probably make it all right. No, it didn't. It just put me off. And I've got to be honest, actually, in my audiobooks, I also tried to listen to Medea by Rosie Hewlett, and I did not finish that one. Again, the women were subjugated so badly, treated so terribly, that I think I got about 4 hours into listening to that. I just can't listen to this anymore. I just don't want to. So I have not really. I think what I've learned from this, I'm not really enjoying Greek retellings either. Maybe there's some more out there that I may enjoy, but I just don't really enjoy books that just harm women at the beginning of the book sexually, for the main story point, you know, because even if those women are going to become stronger later, it's just like, why did we have to go there in the first place? Like, it's not the kind of thing that I like to read. So the next point that I sort of felt a bit disappointed in the book was the Booker Prize winner. So for this, I read Orbital by Samantha Harvey. This was actually suggested by the book club that I'm in. And I've got to be honest, like, I didn't think that I would enjoy this going into it. I only read it because it was part of the book group, and it wasn't a particularly large book. But then saying that, I still feel like it took me forever to read because I had no interest. Nothing exciting happened with this story. It wasn't even a story, it was just observations. And occasionally they'd make an observation, which was like, oh, there's a crack in the fuselage. And you think, oh, this is where the story's going to start. No. And I just kept waiting and waiting. And then I felt like everything was over-explained as well. I still don't understand the last sentence of the story. And I felt like she should have just stopped writing about a page before she actually did. Like, I've never read any of Samantha Harvey's work, so I don't know what the rest of it is like. But Orbital just was not for me. Now, it was the Booker Prize winner, so I appreciate millions of people worldwide have enjoyed that book. It just wasn't for me. It has made me a bit sceptical about Booker Prize winners though, so I'm going to make an effort next year to read another Booker Prize winner, and just see what else is on offer in that space. So The next one was recommended on Facebook. Now this was disappointing. I mean, I'm in a couple of book groups on Facebook, and I just kept seeing The Crash by Freda McFadden. Everybody was raving about this book, and it was everywhere. Despite my better judgment, because I have read some Freda McFadden before, I thought, you know what, I'm going to read this, because it got passed to me anyway by somebody that I know and they had read it. And I just shouldn't have. Like, I just don't really enjoy Freda McFadden books, and she has a massive fan base out there, and that's fine. If you like Freda McFadden, I'm happy for you. She has written a lot of books. She's obviously popular with some people, but I find that the writing is almost elementary in these books, and the Crash in itself, you know, you've got this pregnant woman stuck in a basement, and it just wasn't a good story for me. I felt like it got hyped up so much. I was expecting something much better than the other Freda McFaddens that I had read, and in fact I think it was the worst one that I read. So yeah, I'm not going to be swayed by people on Freda McFadden or anything, because I've read enough of her stuff now that I just think she is not the author for me. Reviewed by my favourite author. Okay, so this was an interesting one. So I came by a book called Hell House, written by Richard Matheson, who also wrote I Am Legend, which is really, really famous. But Hell House had a quote on the cover by Stephen King, and Stephen King had written, "Hell House is the scariest haunted novel ever written." So I was like, great, I'm looking for a scary book, and I also really like Stephen King, so I'm going to read this book. You know, I actually managed to come by it in book 66 as well, so it only cost me £3 to buy rather than the normal £10, so I was like happy with that. I was not happy with this book. It's basically every female character in this book that enters Hell House is sexually assaulted by the house in some of the most depraved and sick ways that could be written. And it seemed to be, you know, none of the men in the house seemed to be subjected to this kind of violence. It was all the women, and it was just everything I hated in a book. It was like trying to get the horror and its kicks from the sexual assault of women. And I think that if that's how you write horror, if that's purely your idea of writing horror, then I'm not interested in anything else that you have written, because it shows an extreme lack of imagination. If your only imagination is thinking up depraved sex scenes to put women in, like, absolutely hated it. And you know, unfortunately this book is quite short. It's under 300 pages long, but you know, I kept reading and thinking, I hope something else is going to happen. Nothing good happened in that book. I wished I did not finish it, and I don't have it anymore. In fact, I was so angry at that book, I actually sold it instead of giving it to the charity shop. I sold it on Music Magpie, and I actually managed to make more money for it. So that was the best thing about that book. So I do not recommend that book at all. And then we have About a Child. So at the beginning of the year, one of the first books I read was The Memory Keeper's Daughter by Kim Edwards. And I think this was the Richard and Judy book club pick as well. I can't quite remember. I do not have this book anymore because I've given it away. And there's about 400 pages in this book, and the text was really small, and it was quite hard going, if I'm honest, because I kept waiting for the story to kind of really kick in and start. The novel itself is about a little girl who has Down syndrome, so I was really encouraged coming into this book because I thought that the topic as it was outlined on the back of the cover sounded really interesting and a little bit different from something that I'd ever read before, and it had come, you know, highly recommended. A lot of people must like this book, but I just felt that it never really lifted off. It just, from what I remember, because remember it's nearly a year ago when I read this book, but from what I remember, like, it didn't really empower this little girl in any way. It just seemed to be her parents arguing over money or who was gonna pay for her or something like that. And I thought that they could have done so much more and given the little girl more of a main stage in the book than they actually gave her. It was very disappointing for me. So yeah, that it just wasn't the read that I was hoping it was. And then finally, main character works in IT. And this is one that I've really just read, which was The Neuromancer by William Gibson. This was the only book that I could find where a character worked in IT. It was quite hard to actually find a book with that theme in it. And essentially, you know, The Neuromancer is quite an old book. It's been going a couple of decades. It's, you know, lauded as a great science fiction novel. In fact, if I understand it, it's supposed to be like the precursor to before the Matrix film was conceived. Apparently that's meant to have taken a lot of its ideas from this book, The Neuromancer. So I had every faith going into it that this was going to be a really, really good book. It is a sci-fi book, and I've just started getting into sci-fi now. So I was really excited to be reading what was considered a classic. I really didn't like this book. It's actually, I didn't finish the book. I got probably about 65 to 70% into the book. I mean, the book is about 300 pages, and I got somewhere like 230 pages, and I literally got to that point and thought, do you know what, I don't care. I don't like these characters and I have no idea what's going on. It was really difficult the way that it was written, and the language just seemed to be bouncing around. I mean, you weren't really sure half the time if they were talking about a person, an object, what was actually happening with those characters. Characters seemed to have multiple names attached to them. You know, and then there was like slang going on as well in the book, and honestly I was like so confused, so I felt a little bit let down by that one. So I think, but you know, if I think about the fact that I've covered off 100 points, and the point of reading these 100 points was to try to uncover some novels that I might never have picked up before had I not been doing this reading challenge. So of those 6 that I just didn't enjoy, I think that's equally as important as the other 94 that I thought were okay or I really did enjoy, because you can't learn what you like to read unless you read some stuff that you really don't enjoy reading. You know, I'd rather the fact, I mean, you know, I've had 18 5-star reads that weren't Stephen King. Now, in the Stephen King books I've written, I've had way more than that. You know, it's difficult to rank his because I just always like them when I read them. So, you know, I'd say that the majority of these 100 reading points that I read, I've thoroughly enjoyed quite a lot of them. And in there, I've had some points that, you know, I found books that I just would not have found had I not been doing this reading challenge. So I probably wouldn't have bothered braving the sci-fi, if I'm honest. Yet, as a result of that, I found Isaac Asimov, who I'm really enjoying his books, and then that led me on to reading Terry Pratchett and Stephen Baxter's The Long Earth series, which I've also really, really enjoyed. So yeah, just that's been a massive highlight for me. And then also there's been a couple of other things in there, like trying to find books where it was written in summer and winter and autumn and spring is actually a lot harder than you would think, because you don't really think about what season your book is set in. So that was quite interesting to do on the channel as well. I did enjoy that. I will be making a separate video where I talk about what the reading challenge is that I'm going to be doing next year, and I'm going to be posting that next week, just before the new year starts. And as I say, I'm not going to replicate all of the points on this list. I've actually written my own list from scratch this time. So let's see if I can have as much fun with that one next year as I have with the one this year. I think that, you know, doing the reading challenge has been really good because it's kept me focused. As I said, it has introduced me to some things and some authors that I would never have known about before. So let me know down in the comments if you have been doing a reading challenge of your own. How do you try to sort of organise your reading? I mean, do you literally just pick up books and read them and not sort of write down what you've read and do any comparisons, or do you have a methodical way of reading, like having a reading challenge? Or I know some people have things like bingo boards, and other people have TBR jars where they've got all their books written down and they write it down on a piece of paper, and then they pick that out and then that's the book that they read. There's so many ways in which you can organise your reading, so let me know down in the comments how you like to do it. And I hope you've liked this video. If you have, please press like, and if you'd like to see more of my content in the future, please press the subscribe button. I'd love to have you here. So yeah, happy Christmas. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching my video, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.